I had respiratory problems all my life. I've never been without. I've had asthma, and as I got older, it got worse. Things began to be taken away from me physically that I wasn't even aware of. I always had trouble going up steps. I always had trouble. As a kid, I couldn't run or play football or baseball with the rest of the kids. But things were taken away. And I noticed that I couldn't walk up steps as well as I could anymore. And I would walk to the garage and I was winded. And the garage for my house is 20, 30 feet. Little things began to catch my attention. The last 2 years at work, I worked behind a computer. I did research and writing. So, it wasn't like I was doing a lot of physical things, but I found myself sitting there. I'd have to go to the bathroom. And I wouldn't go because I was just too much to walk to the bathroom, which was 20, 30 feet down the hall. So I just hold it until I couldn't stand the pain anymore. I'd have to stop walking, simple short distances, a few feet to catch my breath so I could go on. I'd walk into a store, from my car without oxygen. I'd walk from my car to a store, and I'd begin to look around at things, as if I was looking to buy something, just so I could catch my breath. I didn't want anybody to see me leaning over, gasping for air. Once in a while, they'd give me in desperation every couple of months. Matter of fact, towards the end, when I was really bad, I was getting one every other month. They'd put a PICC line, an IV in my arm, and run it almost up into my heart. And then they would give me antibiotics, IV antibiotics, to take it home. And I guess what bothered me about this whole thing was we were all playing a little game. I would tell the doctors that none of this worked, and they would give it to me anyway. And it was like a little game we played, so I'd let them put the PICC in my arm, and I'd go home, and I'd get up I'd have one at 8 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, another at 4 in the morning, or whenever the 8-hour shifts. And I'd sit there so often and say, what am I doing this for? This is the life I lived. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd say, not another day of this, another whole day of not being able to breathe. I'm on oxygen 24 hours a day now. A lot of days I just said the heck with it. I didn't get dressed. I just sat there in the recliner and sucked on oxygen all day. I was dying. And I think that my doctors and I played that game too, where we just didn't talk about it. But I was dying, and they just kept treating me. I have a wonderful pulmonologist, probably one of the most compassionate human beings I've ever met, and truly concerned about all his patients, not just me. But I know that he was doing his best. But I'd run the string out. There was nothing left. When my COPD was out of control, I'd sit there with oxygen on all the time. Half the time in my pajamas. I wouldn't change. I'll give you an idea how bad I looked. My sister, who was probably my closest family member, my younger sister, came to see me one day. And she walked in and she looked at me and she started to cry. And I said, what's wrong? She said, you look terrible. Are you going to die? And of course I felt like I was going to die. I couldn't, there was so much gunk. I don't want to fail to mention this. There was so much gunk in my chest that it used to coat my vocal cords. So I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk on the phone. I couldn't talk in person. People would call me, my friends, my family, how you doing? I wouldn't answer the phone. I could see the number on the caller ID, and I said, why? I can't talk. I couldn't do anything. I was about as close to being dead as I can think of without actually being dead. But everything changed with the BX protocol. I began to notice I didn't need the oxygen just as much as I used to. I'd wake up in the morning. In the old days with COPD, I'd take the oxygen off, and I'd put on my pulse ox, and I'd watch it drop from like 92 to 86 inside of 5 minutes. Now I take the oxygen off with the BX protocol, and it's not dropping at all. Or maybe one percentage point, that's it. And I notice I'm leaving it off longer now. Now I notice I can go up the steps slowly, that I can go up the steps. It was so subtle, I can't really give you an exact timetable of how it broke down. But as of our talk today, I mean, I've been on it for about 3.5 months. And the changes that I couldn't walk anywhere before. Now I can go to a mall, I can go somewhere, I can walk forever. And so my pulmonologist calls me. And so he would call me and he'd say, you know, how you doing? I'd say, I'm really doing great. And he'd say, what? I'd say, yeah, I'm feeling pretty. Up until then, every time I saw him, every time I talked to him, I said, I feel awful. I feel terrible. I said, I'm really sick. You know, sometimes I would ask the guy, I said, can you give me another year? And the first time he called me and asked me that, he said, what are you doing? And I said, you wouldn't believe it. You know, and I said, I don't know, you know, I mean, he's a wonderful guy, but I don't know if he'd be open to what I'm doing. And you know, so I said, when I come to see you, I'll tell you. But I said, I'm not going to tell you on the phone. So another month goes by, another blood test goes by. He calls me again with the results. He says, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing better than ever. I said, by now, I said, I'm working out again. I'm riding an exercise bike. I'm doing 45 minutes a day. My numbers are going through the roof. He says to me, he said, did you have some kind of stem cell research, some kind of stuff like that? I said, no. He said, did you see some kind of a Chinese herbalist? I said, no, nothing like that. So finally we made an appointment, and he made the appointment himself. He didn't pass me off to the gal at the front desk. He said, I got to know what you're doing. I said, I'll come and see you. So we made an appointment, which I haven't kept yet. I mean, it's coming up in the next week or two. But when I go there, I mean, I can't wait to tell him what I'm doing. So I'm hoping, you know, when I sit down with him and they put the thing on my finger that you know, pulls a 98 or 97, that'll blow his mind. But he said to me, I got to know what you're doing. I said, I'll tell you when I see you. I was running about 92 with the oxygen, maybe 91. And as soon as I took it off, it would plummet. I'd go down to like 86, sometimes 85. I even hit a few 79s, you know. My skin was always gray. I was sick and I looked it. But I was all washed out. I simply wasn't getting enough oxygen. So my numbers were without oxygen. With oxygen, maybe 92. Without the oxygen, when I took it off, it would go down to like 85, 86. After I started on the BX protocol, very subtly, my numbers began to come up. And today, I mean, as of our sitting here now, I mean, it's not uncommon for me to pull a 96 and a 97. I very seldom go below 95 without oxygen. These are numbers that were just fantasy for me before. When I was younger, I didn't pull these kind of numbers. Several weeks ago, I had hernia surgery done. And I went in for the pre-admission testing to the hospital. And they didn't know anything about my COPD. But I went in there and one of the things they do is they check your pulse ox. They put the thing on your finger. And the girl did that, and I'm watching the thing on the wall. And it comes up 97. And it hangs there, it just stays there. And the girl said, she said, that's very good for someone with COPD. And I thought, if you only knew, I want to get out of this chair and spike this pulse ox thing. 97. It was unbelievable. Fabulous. Amazing. Nothing short of miraculous. And that was with the BX protocol. That was about 3 weeks ago.